right, here is the beginning of the World War II aviation hangar. Right off the bat, you walk in the door and there's a beautiful chromed out Curtiss P-36A Hawk. Outstanding. And in comparison to the World War I planes, you start looking at some of the specs here and you start to see that you went from, 120 horsepower to 1,050 horsepower and top speeds of about 313 miles an hour and a range of about 830 miles. So the technology changed pretty drastically between 1 and 2. And here is an L2-M Grasshopper that is above us, designated by the red arrow on the side. Here we have a P-35, a Seversky P-35, another awesome chromed out World War II plane. And I'll be the first to admit, a lot of these I've never heard of. Pretty cool looking either way though. All right. And the mannequin here pretty much depicts the characteristics of U.S. Army Air Force personnel fighting on the ground. Fancy duds, huh? Now things are starting to take shape as we get over this way. Here we start getting into some bigger bombers. What do we have here? At first glance, this guy does not ring any bells. It's definitely an earlier model because see that like little spot back there? That doesn't look very aerodynamic on the top of it here. There's an old trainer right there. World War II Link trainer. Dude looks real happy with his training there. Now that looks rather familiar. Pretty impressive. I've always liked that paint job right there too. So up here we have the Douglas B-18A. And some of these get really tough to get into frame because just the sheer size of these things is pretty freaking impressive. And then over here. Now this one looks a little bland. That's kind of a real basic paint job. And I wouldn't have recognized this at first because of the paint job, but this here is a Mitsubishi Zero. So this is a Japanese fighter. Notice the folding wingtips. It's kind of a neat touch. Kind of odd to see an oppositions plane here in a U.S. Air Force Museum, but this is the A6M20. And this was basically our main opponent in the Pacific War. And if you start to look at some of the specs we have here, so again, in comparison to the earlier planes, you've got an engine of 940 horsepower with a maximum speed of 316 miles an hour and a range of almost 2,000 miles. And it had two 20mm cannons and two 7.7mm machine guns. So not only that, but you've got an external fuel tank down there, and that is what pretty much gave it the ability to fly almost 2,000 miles. So these would, basically extend the range of the carrier group. Pretty impressive. Now back to this guy. Always a favorite, the P-40-E or P-40E Warhawk. I've always liked the P-40, and I think it's pretty much because of the paint job and the look. And this guy had a maximum speed of about 362 miles an hour and a range of about 850 miles. It had 6 50 caliber machine guns, count them, 6, and 700 pounds of external bomb load. It had a 1,150 horsepower Allison engine. I've always had a soft spot for the P-40. And I think it's just because look at that. Look at the profile on that thing. Does it get much better looking than that? But it has to have those teeth, you know? Without the teeth, it wouldn't be the same. But look up close there. There's your 50 caliber machine guns. 3 on this side, 3 on that side. You got a little bit of a drop tank down there. Just an amazing plane, all around. One of the most impressive. I don't think it gets much more iconic than the P-40. Most people will drool all day long over a Mustang or a P-47, but you know, if you ask me, I think the P-40 is where it's at. In the looks department, it definitely has it. And it was very capable as well. Again, 6 50 caliber machine guns and the ability to drop bombs as well. 1,150 horsepower. Pretty impressive if you ask me. Next up here is a B-25B. Now this is one of the smaller bombers, but still had some pretty good teeth to it. Did a lot of damage in the war. Was definitely one of the workhorses by far. And it's also one of the bombers that was used in the Doolittle raids. So basically, they were insane enough to take these and try to launch them off of an aircraft carrier and go deep into Japan and pretty much try to hit them on their own territory. This is the bomber that they used in the movie, was it Pearl Harbor? With what, Ben Affleck? And it's hard to believe they pretty much put these on a carrier and shot them off a carrier and flew them deep into Japan and was able to pull off what they did. Outstanding. All right, over here we have the P-39Q Air Cobra. And a pretty nice little diorama here. Looks like it's cold out. There's some snow on the wings there and on the fuselage. And somebody's maintaining it. And then over here, I believe this is a Douglas something or another. Douglas A-24. And the plaque for it basically says Southwest Pacific Combat 1942. The Army chooses a dive bomber. They fought with what they had, is what the plaque says on this guy. And look down below. See some bombs down there. Some smaller bombs over here. Pretty impressive. Looks like a 2-seater as well. You got a gunner in the back, pilot in the front. Nothing too fancy on the paint job, but I'm sure it did. All right, next up, we got an AT-9 from Curtiss. I'm a sucker for chrome, and this one looks absolutely outstanding. These ones don't impress me that much, but the chrome sure does. Nice big dual radial engines on this guy. Then we have an AT-10 over here. And then this is the AT-10 from Beach. Now, what do we have over here? This is an AT-11. And I'll be honest, I've not heard of the AT aircraft before. And over here, we have a BT-13B Valiant. Now, what have we here? Tuskegee pilots. And it looks like a trainer aircraft. And this is the Stearman PT-13D. World War II trainer. I think this sure looks like the plane I flew in years ago at the Red Baron junket at E3 many moons ago, in probably 1998, when Sierra Dynamics was showing off Red Baron 3D. Or maybe it was a Boeing Stearman by then, but this says Stearman PT-13D Cadet. So this is definitely a trainer. Alrighty. I wish they had more planes that had the pinup art on the side of it. That's pretty awesome. This is a B-24. I believe a B-24D. Look at the detail. They have like the dummy gunner in there and everything. This is when bombers started getting really serious. This is a B-24D Liberator. And this one is called the Strawberry Bitch. And look at the little kill marks on the side there with the bombs. Pretty nice stuff. I like this one. Out of the bombers I've seen so far, this is one of the coolest. Alrighty, here's something that I just saw for the first time the other day in Team Fusion Simulations, Desert Wings Tobruk. This is a Beaufighter. Pretty impressive bomber. MK1C. And then as we go over this way, probably one of the most recognizable American icons out there. This is a B-17, and this is the Memphis Belle. Now, I'm not sure if this is the exact plane or not, because I lived in Beaver County, Pennsylvania for a number of years, and I know we had the Memphis Belle at the Heritage Air Museum out there for a number of years in the 90s, but pretty impressive plane. And there's an excellent movie out there that depicts it very well, and it was a B-17F, the Memphis Belle. And it's a pretty big plane at that. Big radial engine. Look at those tires. And it's really hard to appreciate this thing unless I can get to the side over here and just kind of show you how really big this thing is. Because I can't stand back far enough to show you how big this thing really is. Absolutely outstanding stuff. Now this is an 88mm flak 36 cannon. I have to admit, I really thought these would be bigger, but it's still kind of big, but not as big as I thought a flak cannon would be. It looks like these would be pretty easily movable and towed around and dropped right where you needed them. Here's something else kind of interesting. This is an A36A Mustang. Not quite the Mustang I remember. Pretty cool. And then over here, we get into some opposition. So we've got a BF-109 G10 series. I touched it. What a beautiful plane. There's some technical specs on it. Next up, that looks very familiar. I think that's a P-47. It sure is. P-47D Thunderbolt. I have to admit, it's a little bigger than I even thought it would be in person. I've seen these before, but it's been a while since I recall what it really looked like up close. And it is a massive plane. It's very fat. Looks like an overweight plane, to be honest. So now I'm understanding why these things handle like a pig in DCS world in an IL-2. And those are some pretty big bombs that are hanging off the wings on this thing. At least for a World War II fighter to be carrying, you know? Really hard to give you a true scope of how big this thing is. But this is the P-47D Thunderbolt. And in comparison, here's a pretty good shot here. That is the 109 over there, and that is the P-47. It's damn near twice as big. Almost 3 times as round in circumference, to be honest. So next time you're in DCS or IL-2 Great Battles and you're flying your P-47 like me and you're saying, wow, does this thing handle like a Mack truck? Well, in comparison to a BF-109, it sure looks like a Mack truck. Wow, is that big. All right, guys, this is the B-26 Marauder. This is the one I flew in years ago, and I think it was a Microsoft event where they were taking us up and giving us a check ride and having some fun. And it's really fun because inside of this thing, there's all kinds of little pathways. You got to crawl through the side, and then you can get to this guy. And then there's a pathway up above him that takes you up to this guy. And then you kind of walk through, I believe, right about here, through the bomb bay, over the bomb bay doors. And then you get, this thing's pretty big. That's just the engine in the way right there. But then you get up to where the cockpit is and you go up a little bit. And then there's another pathway that goes down underneath here and you crawl all the way to the front to the nose gunner. And they landed the plane, and me and this other guy were just having the time of our lives. We had headphones on to communicate with everybody on the plane, so they could tell us, hey guys, get back to your seats and strap in, we're gonna land. Well, me and the other guy were just so amazed up in this cockpit. So being up in this guy is like really being the hood ornament on a NASCAR, you know? And it was just so amazing to be up in there and watch things fly by as you're flying, you know? And I'm talking to the guy with me and I'm like, hey man, it looks like they're trying to land. And he goes, no, they can't land because we're not back there. And I didn't think nothing of it because we didn't have our headphones on. And then they make another hard turn and make another pass at the runway. And this time it looks like they're landing. Well, they landed with us in there because they couldn't communicate with us because somebody would have had to crawl through the entire thing to tap us on the shoulder and said, hey dummies, get back in your seats and strap in. So it was a pretty cool experience. I used to have like a VHS-C tape of it that I think my idiot ex-wife destroyed at some point years ago, unfortunately. But it was really fun stuff, and it was one of those experiences that I'll remember for the rest of my life because it was one of the most fun things I think I've ever done when it comes to real-world aviation, was get a ride in this guy and then have the freedom to roam around the entire thing once we were in the air freely. Absolutely outstanding stuff. And again, that is the B-26G. Now, next up here is pretty much one of the most iconic World War II fighters, the P-51D Mustang. I really don't even have to say much about this plane. If you know anything about aviation and World War II, this is probably the Corvette of World War II aviation planes. This is probably one of the most, sought after and iconic World War II planes that you can get. It's done so much, there's no point of me even trying to begin to cover the history of this thing. And it's a real beautiful example they have here. It looks like it's all chromed out, which is awesome. But I'll tell you what, in comparison, there's the P-51 and there's the P-47. That thing still looks massive compared to this thing. And then over here, we've got a C-47D bomber, which is another massive plane. there's all kinds of stuff hanging from the ceiling. A lot of planes I've never heard of and I have no interest in, you know? And here's something over here. What's this guy? The DH-98 Mosquito. And then here is one of my favorite British planes, the Supermarine Spitfire. I really wish it had a cooler paint job, because you almost never see a Spitfire with that paint job. It's kind of ugly that way, to be honest, but I guess they're depicting it as how the US Air Force had flown it, because there is the star on the side of it. Beautiful plane though. Again, one of the most iconic British planes, I think, for the World War II era is the Supermarine Spitfire. And if you think of Battle of Britain or World War II Europe combat, the Spitfire is pretty much one of the first ones that come to mind. Now, in terms of German aircraft and German bomber fighters, here is a Ju-88D. Pretty impressive plane. All right, right next to the Spitfire is a Focke-Wulf 190 D9, the Dora. This is probably one of the most fun planes I think I've ever flown in flight sims, from the German side, in both DCS and IL-2 Great Battles. Absolutely love this plane, and it looks pretty cool in person. And again, the thing I'm noticing is it's pretty thin, it's pretty skinny. They don't look as big as you would think they would look. Still a big plane, I guess, but I guess that's what makes them so maneuverable and so dangerous. But this is the 190D-9, the Dora, in person. Very pretty plane. All right, next up is the ME-262. This is the one that maybe could have changed the war, maybe not. Kind of hard to tell, because it never really took part in the air war. And I just put together a video the other day of the ME-262 in the Great Battle series. And if it's modeled realistically, the guns on this thing are absolutely devastating. The rockets that it could carry would just devastate anything that it made contact with. It also had the ability to carry bombs as well. And all of that with 2 jets under the wing powering it. Just an amazing plane. And it has to make you wonder what could have been had this thing been able to really take part in the air war. I guess we'll never really know, will we? Still looks like a big whale to me. Alrighty. Here's another example of the P-47. This is the P-47D Razorback. Way back on the other end over there is the other P-47D variant, but this is the Razorback variant. And this is the same one that we have in the Great Battles series. Battle over Normandy, early access at the moment. And once again, this thing is freaking massive. And notice, looks like this guy's got an extra gun. Or 2. Yeah, 8 50 cal machine guns and 10 5-inch rockets, or 1,500 pounds in bombs this thing could carry. 2,430 horsepower with a maximum speed of 433 miles per hour. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't been able to get that thing up to 400 very often. I think I've hit about 300 before I ended up losing speed and dropping like a rock out of the sky. But then again, I'm not a boom and zoom fighter, so I have to learn those tactics a little bit better. but this thing is massive. Next up, the A-20G. The Douglas A-20G Havoc. This is another one that's available to us, and I've not flown it much, to be honest. It's there, but just not one I've dove into yet. I got to figure out how to do all the different positions throughout the crew quarters and whatnot. And then above us is an R-4B Hoverfly, and it's a early helicopter. How cool is that? Over here, we have an OA-10. It's like a seaplane. And the massive C-46. Look how big that thing is. And over here, you got the B-29. Now we're at the end of World War II, and we're approaching the Korean War era. And there's a whole nother hangar just for the beginning of the jet age. And here's another side view of the A-20G. Nice little diorama of these guys just chilling.
Looks like the striker's down, all right. Move. Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that burns me up. We live in such an age of such candy asses that they have to put a sign in that says weapon used in this diorama are non-functioning reproductions. Really? No, they're real and they work. Some days it's really frustrating being part of what is this so-called human race anymore, of people that get triggered over anything. And then we have the George. The Kawasaki N1K2-JA. Japanese fighter bomber. And this is pretty much the end of the World War II aviation hangar here at the United States National Air Force Museum.